It is ironic that here today we have this great story of a meal for everyone when we can't really share a meal together because of this pandemic time. Normally, behind us, Freddie and Michael would be working on hamburgers and hot dogs. And if that were happening, my dog would whine about wanting to get there instead of just wanting to get up here, right? And a table would be lined with all of your offerings that you bring to share, and we would invite everyone to join us like we always do. I wish we were in normal times so we could share that hospitality with one another. And I also wish for us to remain safe and for no one to go home worried that they crossed some kind of COVID boundary that makes them wonder if they got infected. That's why we wear masks, that's why we meet outside, and that's why we keep a generous amount of space in between us so that you know the generosity that is between us today is that space that we keep in between us. And so instead of sharing a meal today, we get to dwell in a story about a time with another group of people who shared a meal, who had gathered all together. Jesus had set out to spend some time alone, to go to a deserted place, away from the crowds. And he's just been told that John the Baptist died. That's what happens right before this text that Jennifer read for us. So there's some heaviness there. And he probably needs time to think, and time to plan, and time to grieve. But the crowds follow him there, out there to this deserted place. Perhaps also because of this death. We know something, don't we, about unjust deaths that cause uprisings. So try to imagine it. Try to imagine that you are Jesus, tired of teaching, tired from people thinking they understand you, but you know that they don't, wanting a break. Maybe some of you feel that right now too. Nervous about what happened with John the Baptist and wondering if it will happen to you too, and it will, and grieving that loss. But you can't shake the crowd. They keep coming even as you go to a place with no resources for any of them, no food available, no porta potties. They probably didn't have those anyway. Maybe they didn't care about that as much. This crowd now is growing, and it's growing to 5,000 people and more because, as Jennifer pointed out, they did not count the women and children. Interestingly, here's a little detail for you that we might not catch from our place being a couple thousand years in distance away and also across the world. The number 5,000 happens to be also the number of a Roman legion. In other words, an army. So the author was likely trying to tell his readers by saying that there were 5,000 men who showed up, and then women and children, is that it was an army that had gathered around Jesus. An uprising equal to the size of the army that would oppresses them. Again, we know something about unjust deaths that happen in the context of oppression and the uprising that can follow. What is it like to realize you're the person that an army has gathered around trying to lead them? And he spends the day healing and teaching. That's his response to the demand that people make on him to start a revolution. As night comes, the disciples start to get nervous. There's nothing out here for anyone, and they're all so tired and nervous about this crowd that is gathered in the wake of John the Baptist's death. If you think back to June and what the rally and the marches and the protests were like during the day, and how that shifted when the sun went down, we might get a sense of what the disciples were feeling in their nervousness. Just imagine being one of them. Their nervous, tired energy. Finally, someone tries to stop Jesus, tries to tell him to tell the crowds that it's all over for the night and they should go home and get some food and rest. But Jesus doesn't take very well to instructions or being told what to do by his disciples. And so he says to them, they don't need to go. You feed them. If I were there, if I were the one who had the guts to tell Jesus, pull him aside and try to tell him, disperse the crowds, because we're all getting pretty nervous. And his answer to me was, you feed them. And then I thought about our 2 fish and 5 loaves. Imagine the emotions that disciple felt. And the others who overheard fear, anger, perhaps thinking that of all the things that Jesus has said and done, this might be the craziest and most impossible so far. And we don't think about the crowd very often, too. Who do you think was in that crowd? The various people, both the young men who were riled up and ready to fight, galvanized by this latest action to finally go up against the state, but also people who followed just to see and hear Jesus more. Kids who were probably whispering in their mother's ears, beginning to whine, flopping themselves on the ground and saying they're hungry. Maybe, or maybe that's a uniquely United States thing that happens. Practical moms wondering when he's going to quit so they can all go back and get some kind of food before things close down, thinking the goldfish crackers aren't going to last that long and keep the kids satiated. Okay, they didn't have goldfish crackers. Maybe dates? Pistachios? There were probably people worried that this was going to erupt into a riot. There were probably people hoping that Jesus would make it back to them in the crowd because they'd waited a long time for the healing they might experience. Others having a transformational experience. I'm sure there were people there who disagreed with Jesus, who followed the crowd just because they wanted more information about what was going on with this guy and this group of people who were gathered around him. Maybe they could report it to the authorities and curry some favor with the soldiers who guarded them and kept the peace. And maybe even some people who don't care about any of it, but kind of like being around to start chaos. There's the goldfish coming out. You feed them, Jesus said. Here it comes. And then he takes bread, and he blesses it, and he breaks it, and he gives it to them. And they all eat. If you come from a tradition that celebrates communion, you'll recognize those words. And that's intentional. That this meal with the 5,000 sounds like the words that he says at the Last Supper, when he was gathered with his disciples and said, "Take and eat, this is my body and it's given for you." The same actions, similar words, a foreshadowing of what would come. At Spirit Garage, for the last 5 weeks, we've been hearing little pieces of sayings that Jesus said to try to describe what the kingdom of heaven is like. Now, instead, Jesus is going to show them a really good example. Instead of a parable with words, this is a parable in action. Parables are things that are little sayings that try to help you understand a reality that can't really be understood by us. So this is just a picture parable instead of a word parable. Look, it's going to look like this. It looks like everyone gathered together in one place. It looks like everyone, for whatever reason they are, no matter who they are, it looks like everyone sitting down together and eating together, not worrying about who they are eating with and who has touched their food. It isn't a ridiculous feast, but everyone gets their fill, and there's more than enough. All the 5,000 ate, and the women and children, as we like to say at Spirit Garage, all means all, right? We've been watching that work happen down the street at Holy Trinity on Lake Street for months now. At first, they opened their doors to their building as the buildings around them were burning and protesters were in need of care. And then they kept on providing for businesses that were losing storefronts and whole buildings. And then they shifted to providing food and household needs for people who probably used to shop at the 3 grocery stores that burned, but maybe they've always needed that food and those household supplies. They never anticipated so many people would show up. They were overwhelmed for the first couple of days, had to shut down one day, unprepared, But they learned quickly how to change the operation to meet the needs and keep the peace, and the people kept coming. You give them food, Jesus said. They wonder at Trinity sometimes if it will be enough. And they have to remind themselves and keep on reminding themselves to trust God and trust that there will be enough. In both places, at Holy Trinity on Lake Street, they take volunteers every Wednesday and Friday, by the way. It's just and in this deserted place where Jesus went, it's just a glimpse, which is all we get of the kingdom of heaven as it exists in the here and now. Both places know need, the very real experience of a lack of food, but also an experience of provision, of enough. I don't know how this happened out there in that deserted place, how his action of breaking the bread and blessing it and then passing it around somehow provided for everyone. I do know that weird things happen in the world, things that are unexplainable. So when I start to question the validity of the miracles or rationalize it all away, maybe everybody had a lunch in their stash and they saw Jesus doing this and they thought, well, we can probably share some of our lunch, and that's how everybody was fed. Sometimes you'll hear that. Could be, I don't know. I just have to lean on that Mary Oliver poem that we read at the beginning, which gives no answers, but it does invite you to just eat, be happy, and accept the miracle. So I'm going to close by sharing that poem with you one more time. I told you I loved it, right? Why worry about the loaves and the fishes? If you say the right words, the wine expands. If you say them with love and the felt ferocity of that love and the felt necessity of that love, the fish explode into many. Imagine him speaking. And don't worry about what is reality or what is plain or what is mysterious. If you were there, it was all those things. If you can imagine it, it is all those things. Eat, drink, be happy. Accept the miracle. Accept, too, each spoken word, spoken with love. Amen.